This is not a tale of gods bound by fate, it is not. Spartan ash clings to Kratos' Capia banner of unresolved rage. Atreus draws his first bow beneath a crimson sky. Cloak Spartan whips ash in the gale. Fenrir clings to jaws closed not on divine Kratos' flesh, but on Capia fate itself, banner of unresolved rage. Atreus draws his first bow beneath a crimson sky. Fenrir, the wolf meant to devour, chose the chain, not prophecy, defiance. A god's first breath in shadow, a wolf's hunger redirected not toward the divine, but the damned. What if the wolf who was meant to devour the god chose instead to become his prisoner? Fenrir's jaws closed not on divine flesh, but on fate itself. The Norns wove their threads tight, a wolf's hunger, a god's wrath, a future gnawed raw in the frost. Yet choice is a blade even time cannot sheath. To bear Kratos as a chain was no accident, it was a fracture in the loom. Each snarl, each shackle, a stitch unraveled. The wolf became both captor and captive, his teeth trading ruin for restraint. What does a creature forged to end an age do when it refuses the role? It becomes a paradox. The Norns spun their lies of prophecy, but Fenrir's bond with the damned was a rebellion etched in blood and iron. Not destiny, defiance. A god's shadow now bound not to kill, but to atone. How many threads must snap before the loom itself burns? The forge's breath still whispers through Sparta's bones. Ash clung to Kratos' blade as he carved through gods who had already died. Zeus's thunder cracked a hollow promise, a retribution for a debt no man could repay. A queen's blood stained the floor of a palace that forgot her name. Children of Kronos swallowed and spat out, gnawed at the edges of a fate that had no mercy. Faye walked that same ruin with a wolf's shadow in her veins. Jotun frost coiled in her voice when she spoke of Asgard's lies. She saw what the Norns could not, a god's chains forged not by prophecy, but by a wolf's refusal to bite. Odin's mask was a skull, Tyr's hand was a grave. They fed Kratos a story of vengeance, but Faye's foresight tasted of rust and rain. She knew the blade that would shatter Aesir thrones was not Leviathan's, but a choice, Fenrir's choice. The wolf did not howl when Kratos' grip closed around his throat, did not snarl when the god's scars bloomed across his hide. Fenrir's golden eyes held a question older than Yggdrasil. What if the predator becomes the caged? What if the hunt is the hunter's trap? Kratos' rage had devoured Olympus. Now in Asgard's cold halls it choked on its own echo. The wolf's bond was no curse, it was a mirror. A god who had killed to forget now bled to remember. Faye watched the threads fray. The Norns wove their lies in the dark, but Fenrir's silence was a blade of its own. Not all defiance needs a roar. Some of it is a whisper, a breath on the back of fate's neck. How many threads must snap? The loom creaks. The answer is not in blood. It is in the space between a wolf's teeth and the hand that lets them close. What if the wolf who was meant to devour the god chose instead to become his prisoner? Kratos' blade did not carve his legend. Eris Pact did. A god's blood traded for title, god of war, a crown of ash and fury. The rage was not new, it was not learned. It was the same fire that turned Olympus to dust, the same storm that made Zeus a memory. Odin knew this. He saw it in the threads, the Norns' tapestry of slaughter. So he gave an eye for Mimir's well, drank the poison of foresight, and cursed himself to wisdom. Knowledge became his chain. He watched the boy god harden into a weapon, watched the wolf grow teeth sharp enough to split the sky. Fenrir's bond with Kratos was no accident of fate. The Norns spun their lies. The wolf's jaws trembled with purpose when they closed around the god's arm. Not to kill, to bind to say, I will not be your omen. I will be your reckoning, the wolf chose the chain, the wolf chose the prisoner. Every snarl, every shackle was a hymn to defiance. Eris Pact, a mirror, Odin's sacrifice, a prelude. Fenrir's choice was the first fracture in the loom. Rage is not chaos, it is theology. Kratos' Greek saga wrath was the seed that split the Aesir's sky. Odin's eye saw too much, but not this, a wolf who refused to be the end. Instead, Fenrir became the bridge between prophecy and freedom, between God and mortal. Between the hand that grips a sword and the teeth that let it go. The path to Ragnarok was never set in stone, it was set in choice. A god who bled for a title, a king who drowned in knowledge, a wolf who wore chains as a crown. The loom creaks, the threads burn, and the answer. It is not in the wolf's teeth, it is in the hand that lets them close. The wolf was never meant to submit. Kratos' blade found Fenrir's jaw not to shackle, but to share, a pact forged in blood, not chains. The Norns wove a fate where gods fell to fangs. Instead, a god became a bridle. Fenrir's howl that day was not of pain, it was a surrender to purpose. The wolf who would have swallowed Odin's throat now let a mortal's hand rest on his neck. A paradox, the predator bound by trust, the Norns' threads frayed, their loom trembled. Atreus stood at the realm between. Ragnarok's storm split the sky. He did not flee the wolf's spirit rising in him. He did not fight it. He became it. Fenrir's rage, channeled through a boy's trembling fingers, tore asunder the veil of destiny. The boy who was supposed to die that night, he became the thread that rewove the tapestry. The Norns had spun a tale where Fenrir's jaws ended all things, but Kratos' choice planted a seed. Atreus' choice made it grow. A god's submission, a boy's ascension. Two acts that turned prophecy into a weapon. What did the Norns foresee when they saw a wolf wear a god? Not the end, a beginning. Fenrir's bond was no cage. It was a mirror. It showed the Norns their own weakness. They could not see a fate unbound by hunger. The storm fades, the ash settles. And the question lingers, did the Norns weave this, or did they fear it? The threads still burn, but now they burn with a fire the loom cannot contain. But the cost was not measured in blood alone. The chains Fenrir forged with his teeth still reek of old one iron, sharp and sour in the air. Each link hums a hymn of stolen fatethas, is the price of a wolf who refused his hunger. The Norns wove their threads in trembling hands, for what cracks in the loom when a prisoner becomes the jailer. Their whispers now choke on rust, their design unraveling where Fenrir's paws pressed down. The cost was a god's leash, yes, but also the first splinter in time's cage. What if the wolf who was meant to devour the god chose instead to become his prisoner? Fenrir's fangs never closed on Odin's throat. The Norns wove his destiny to shatter an empire, but he wove his own thread tighter. A god bound not by chains, but by a boy's hand pressed to his fur. Kratos' blade once carved fate in Greece. Here it carved a wound. The wolf's choice fractured the pantheon's order. Asgard burned not from prophecy, but from a god who refused to bite. The war that followed drowned Valhalla in blood. Warriors who once saluted Odin's name now scavenged ash. Kratos, who learned to kill to survive, now killed to atone. His rage, honed on gods who betrayed him, became a storm with no shore. Atreus walked between worlds, a sun, a weapon, a whisper of what the Norns could not silence. Fenrir's bond to him was no curse. It was a door left ajar in time's vault. Mortals paid the price. Cities drowned in frost, crops withered under a sun choked by war. Yet in the wreckage something shifted. The Norns spun new threads, frayed and wild. Kratos, who buried children in Greece, now buried kings. His path through Valhalla is a mirror. Every ghost he meets knows his guilt. They ask no forgiveness. They only wait, the cost, a god's leash, a wolf's silence. A father's hands forever stained by the price of a future the Norns did not foresee. The wolf did not break his chain, he forged a new one. Kratos, once a blade turned inward, now bore the weight of a son's becoming. Atreus, whose laughter once echoed with the hollow promise of prophecy, now walked as a storm-given name. Fenrir's jaws closed not on divine flesh, but on the myth that birthed him. The Norns wove of devouring and fate, yet the wolf chose silence over slaughter. A god's leash became a father's tether. A son's shadow stretched into Loki's gate. No prophecy dictated this. Only the quiet calculus of a creature who saw the end of an age and chose a different equation. Kratos, who once drowned gods in his wake, now carried a child whose destiny was to outrun his. The Spartan's ghost did not haunt the past. It became the bridge between what was and what could be. Redemption is not the absence of sin, it is the presence of choice. Fenrir's bond was not a cage. It was a mirror. In its reflection, Kratos saw the shape of a fatherhood that defied the cycle. Atreus, who learned fire from a killer's hands, now wielded it as both heir and anomaly. The boy who feared his bloodline became its unflinching architect. A Loki not born of mischief, but of a boy who refused to be the Norns' puppet. The wolf's silence was not submission. It was the first whisper of a future the gods did not script. Kratos, who carved his way through Olympus and Asgard, found his truest battle in the space between a son's becoming and his own undoing. The chains of destiny are only as unbreakable as those who wear them. They walked away from Ragnarok not as victors, as survivors, as architects. A father and son who turned the script of gods into a story of their own making. The Norns may spin, but the thread is not theirs to keep. The world breathes in silence now. Snow clings to Fenrir's fur, each flake a defiance of the heat his blood once commanded. His chain, forged in the bellows of Muspelheim, lies cold against Kratos' ribs' second heartbeat, steady and foreign. The god walks not as prisoner nor master, but as a bridge between what was written and what is made. Atreus follows, eyes on the frost-etched path, the boy's shadow merging with the wolf's. The Norns' loom still hums in the void between stars. Threads of gold and ash coil around Yggdrasil's roots, whispering of endings yet unwoven. But here, in the marrow of this moment, fate is not a script, it is a scar. Fenrir's jaws, which were meant to close around Odin's throat, now grip only air. His choice to bind himself, though, let the Greek god's blade pierce his flesh, rip the first hole in the tapestry. A wound the Norns cannot stitch, Kratos feels it. The weight of the chain is not iron but memory, each link a battle, a betrayal, a boy's name whispered in a language of dead gods. Atreus feels it too. The boy knows the wolf's eyes when they soften, not with malice but with the quiet ache of a creature who traded his destiny for a question. Asterisk, can a monster be remade or only remembered? Asterisk, the Norns spin. The world turns, but the threads now fray at the edges, unraveling into something new. Kratos and Atreus walk on, the wolf follows. And in their wake the old stories bleed into the snow, while the future unguided, unchained begins to take shape. Word count 215. What if the wolf who was meant to devour the god chose instead to become his prisoner? Kratos did not slay Zeus. He became his opposite, a god who traded divinity for blood. Atreus did not burn like Baldur, he carried his truth through ash. In Fenrir's jaws, the Norns saw a future where fate gnashed its teeth but found only silence. Tyr's hand was the first to break the Norns' thread. He did not feign loyalty, did not carve lies into his bones. When he stepped into Fenrir's maw, he did not ask the wolf to trust. He asked the gods to see asterisk. And Fenrir, who had waited centuries to be bound, became the first to choose his chain. Not as a prisoner of prophecy, but as a thief of it. The wolf's bond with Kratos was no accident, it was a reckoning. A god who had feasted on the weak now wore the mark of the mortal who refused to kneel. Every scar on Kratos' back became a word in a language the Norns could not translate. Asterisk redemption asterisk, it read, asterisk defiance asterisk. Odin's eyes saw all, his hands took none. Tyr's was the only hand that asterisk gave asterisk. In the end, the wolf's choice was the purest act of honesty in a story built on deception. The chain that bound him did not shacklate asterisk freed asterisk, not from destiny, but from the weight of being its instrument. What does a god become when the future he was born to destroy becomes the only thing he fights to protect? The old stories crumble. The new is written in teeth and tendon, and in the snow where Tyr's sacrifice and Fenrir's silence meet, the first unchained god takes his first breath. Word count 269. The chain script was no blessing, no curse either. Mimir, who drank the well's price, knew its truth. Even the bound can break the world. Fenrir did not gnash his jaws at Kratos. He gnashed them at the weave of fate, each link a noose on Odin's design, each scar on his muzzle a thumbprint of defiance. The Norns spun their threads tight, wolf to kill, god to die, but Fenrir wore the chain not as a shackle but as a sentence, a wolf who became the judge. Kratos, the executioner, did not see it. His blade carved freedom, blind to the prisoner who held the key. The snow swallowed their struggle, the chain's script remained. A secret between Mimir's tongue and the wolf's silent rage. Fenrir's breath, once a storm, now hissed through iron, not a prison, a promise. The world breaks not by the roar of the unbound, but the whisper of the bound who forget their chains, even the bound. Mimir's voice, dry as Yggdrasil's roots, carried the weight, can break the world, the inscription bled into frost. The wolf's eyes, twin voids, held no hungeringly the taste of a fate he'd spat out. Redemption is not the absence of chains, it is the presence of a choice. Fenrir chose the god's side, not to save him, to unmake the story the Norns wrote in blood. The chain's script remained untranslated, but Mimir's knowing gaze spoke louder than runes. The wolf's first breath as a prisoner was Ragnarok's first crack, a god unchained, a world rebound by the will of the one who wore the cage. The chains whispered of oaths shattered, cold iron warm with the wolf's defiance, a paradox, freedom bound in teeth and claw. The Norns loomed trembled threads of fate, now frayed, their visions blind. The air thickened, heavy with ozone and ancient magic. What if Mimir's well, where knowledge drowns, holds whispers of this rebellion? What else did he know of gods who unmake